All right, we've got the poll going, and we'll let that run for just a few more seconds here, but let me welcome everyone to a RedwoodJS 1.0 meetup. We are really excited to have you here, and we're going to talk all about 1.0. We had a launch week a few weeks ago. We're going to recap that, and I want to give you a heads up for what the format of this webinar will be like. So this is a Zoom webinar, and that means you don't have to worry about whether your video is hidden or not, turned off. You have chat permissions. There is also a Q&A that should be enabled, so you can ask questions as we go. We will be watching those, but there's a lot of ways to participate. And if we have some discussions at the end, we could even have some people go to audio or join us on stage. We'd love to get there. But the format will be this. We have a few fun announcements and recaps for you that we want to start with. And then we have a lot of demos. There are all kinds of categories of features that Redwood has packed into 1.0. And we want to make sure we show you examples and have demos across the board for those. We have a guest from Prisma that will be joining us to walk us through on the data side, what Redwood and Prisma integration looks like. That's going to be a fun example. And then we have a fun, some interviews with the 4 founders of RedwoodJS that'll come at the end. Redwood has actually been in development for at least 3 years. And we wanted to have some time to share some stories about where all this came from. And Amanda's going to be hosting that. So that's does anyone, Amanda, Tom, does anyone need to know anything else before we get started? I think we're good. I could talk about the poll, but are we good? Did I miss anything?
I think you covered it.
All right.
Sounds good to me.
What do you think about, do you guys see the poll there? I'll end this shortly, but then I'll lose the results for a bit. But we've had 50% of the people that are here right now have tried out 1.0. That's honestly higher than I thought it would be. Did you guys see the poll? No, you can't. Oh, you can't see the poll? Man, what if okay, let me end the poll. Now, can you see the poll? Nope, not yet.
Oh, wait, there was a button. A button showed up. Oh, now we see it.
Now you see it? Okay, there we go. There we see the poll. All right, what do you think? 20% have deployed to production. That's pretty rad. 50% have tried it. And as expected, a lot of people here that haven't used Redwood yet. So, which is great. That's why we host these events. We hope that not only do you get to know the community here, but you get excited about using Redwood, and the community can be a resource for you as you use it. So yeah, I'm surprised how many people have deployed that thing to production. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, these are pretty great numbers.
I'm excited.
All right. Well, Amanda, I'll let you kick things off. So, and let's make sure you can share your screen, whoever's screen sharing first. Or I'm sorry, Tom, I'll let you kick things off and make sure you can share your screen.
Yeah, I'll share. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to have the 1.0 behind us now and have a lot of you trying that out. So we wanted to start this meetup off by just recapping a little bit of what 1.0 means, what's included in 1.0, and we'll talk later on about where we want to go from here. So we really see Redwood as a combination of features tightly integrated to allow you to move faster from a side project to a startup, if that's what you want to do. And we're really focusing a lot on helping people build startups all the way from inception. And we welcome you to the community to talk about ideas through implementation, choosing vendors, even as far as understanding how venture capital works, go to market, product market fit, all of these things we have a lot of experience with in our community. And we want to leverage that to help you build what you're trying to build more easily, more quickly, and with less pain, because face it, doing a startup is really hard. That's what we're here for, to help. And it starts with the technology. And Redwood has really evolved quite a bit from when we first started working on it. And we'll get into that history towards the end of this session. But I just want to go over what Redwood is today. So Redwood really starts with design. We want Redwood as a tool to be with you all the way from designing your application from a visual and UX perspective, all the way through deploy. So for design, we've chosen to integrate tightly Storybook. Storybook, if you haven't used it, is this really great tool for being able to see your React components individually and be able to sort of show off or select the different inputs to your components. And I love this because it allows you to design and build your components in isolation outside of your application, which is a lot easier than trying to get your application into a specific state, trying to get the database set up exactly how you want it to show a component in some specific state. So it allows you to separate those tasks of designing your interface from integrating it into your application. And so that's beautifully integrated from the very beginning. Testing is something we've spent a lot of time integrating and focusing on. We're based on Jest, and we add a variety of nice things. On top of that, we have something called scenarios that allows you to get your database set up in exactly the fashion you want to be able to test some specific scenario. So you may have different scenarios, like let's say you have a user and they've just signed up, and that's the state you want your database to be in. You can set up a scenario specifically for that, and that looks like just insert statements, essentially, that go into your database done via Prisma insert syntax. Once you have those, then you can run different sets of tests against those different scenarios. We also make it really easy to mock your GraphQL calls. Having that separation between the backend and the front end makes that kind of testing really simple to do, where you know what response you should expect from your server. You want to test that the front end is working in a specific way. We have functionality to allow you to do that mocking really, really easily. Auth and security are primary concerns. We have a ton of auth providers. You'll see some of the logos up here on top of the different providers that we have tight integrations with, and you can set those up pretty much with just a single command line invocation. So those are really easy to get going if you like one of those providers, or you can roll your own. We have an abstraction layer and API so that you could implement your own kind of authentication or integrate with a provider that we haven't created yet and maybe contribute that back. So authentication is first class, very easy to do. And security is obviously paramount for any kind of web application framework. And we spend a lot of time thinking about this from a GraphQL perspective, making sure that this framework is secure by default. That means that without doing anything, you can be sure that unauthorized people, users, can't access your GraphQL endpoints out of the box. You have to do a little bit of work to say who has access. It's not really much work. And we make it easy to implement a specific function that you can then call from your backend services so that it's authenticated in exactly the way that you want, and you're not going to accidentally create a new GraphQL function that happens to be open to the world. You have to be a bit more explicit than that. You have to say this is public or this requires some sort of authentication. You have to do one or the other. So you have to be explicit, which creates a secure by default mechanism that really is easier than I've ever seen this done before with any other tool. So making the GraphQL side of your application easy is at least 50%, maybe more, of the developer ergonomics that we work with, because that stuff is hard. Getting your GraphQL side really nailed is quite challenging, and we want to make that part easier. From a data and transport, this is GraphQL. We're using it here, but we want this to be as easy as possible. So we've created an abstraction called cells that allow you to do data fetching from your front end to your back end via GraphQL in a declarative fashion. And that's a big part of it, but it's just GraphQL. So if you want to bypass that, you certainly can. If you want to create another client, be it a mobile client or a desktop client or a command line interface client, or even an app that runs in a car or on a kiosk in a mall, whatever it happens to be, GraphQL is going to serve that need. And that's why we focus on GraphQL on the back end. But we want to make that as easy as possible on the front end. And that's where the data and transport features from the client side fit into this. And this works all with authentication and makes this whole thing really easy for you to accomplish, so that you're not worrying about GraphQL. You're not thinking about GraphQL too much. You're mostly thinking about your functionality. And we try to make that layer transparent, but still it's GraphQL. And so you have the multi-client advantages of that. And of course, no startup or project is complete without shipping it, maybe the most important step. And again, we have tight integrations with various providers. You see some of the logos up there. We're working on many more. And so what started, Redwood really started as a serverless focused framework. It is no longer serverless focused, I would say. It is both serverless and serverful focused. It can do it all. The architecture allows you to deploy across any sort of deployment strategy that really exists today, pretty much. If you like the advantages of serverless, go for it. There can be real great advantages there. If you want to have servers, go for it. If you want to containerize, go for it. All of these are possibilities with Redwood. So whatever you want to do, whatever your specific needs are, and if you don't know what your needs are, talk to us and we'll help you decide which one of these providers would be best. Then we got you covered right there. And that's all in 1.0. We really wanted it to include all those things. That's why it took 2 years since the 0.1 release. But we think that this release is awesome. We think you're going to love it. Many of you are already using it. Many of you have already deployed it. But of course, there's a long way to go. This is just the beginning. It's a 1.0, right? Maybe we'll have a 2.0 in a month. It's hard to say, right? But I think that I think we're going to move fast from here, and we can work on new features now, which I'm excited about. So that's what's in 1.0. Amanda?
Thank you, Tom. Hey, everyone. So as you all know, we launched V1 earlier this month. And on that Monday, April 4th, we released V1, and Tom also announced 1 million in Redwood funding, which is going to allow us to continue development over the next year. And then on Tuesday, we kicked off our events with the Startup Showcase, which was this amazing, very long but very amazing event where we talked with various startup founders and had demos of their applications that they built on Redwood, as well as 2 panels with founders as well as investors. And then on Wednesday, as you may or may not know, Redwood has over 25 partner integrations. So on the Wednesday, we actually held 2 partner office hours where the core team met with various partners from companies such as Stripe, Prisma, Gitpod, Netlify, and Storybook, and many more, to talk to all of you about the integrations and whatnot. Excuse me. And then on Thursday, we closed out the week with a big announcement from Tom, which he'll get to in a minute, and which was followed by startup office hours, where we once again sat down with our startup founders and went over what it's like creating a startup, what kind of things you need, and all your questions answered. And all of this and more is on, you can relive it all on the V1 website, the launch site, which is v1launchweek.redwoodjs.com. There's links to our YouTube channel. All of these events were recorded, so you can go check those out on our website.
All right,
Tom,
thank you, Amanda.
back to you.
That was an amazing week. I was exhausted afterwards, but I told everyone on the team, getting to 1.0 is going to be really, really hard, and it's going to feel like it's dragging, and you're going to want to work on new features, but we have to focus on 1.0. But once we do this launch, you're going to be so happy. And I think that everyone was really happy that we got that out the door. And it was just it was a really fun week. I'm so glad so many people came by. I think we really raised the number of people that know what Redwood is, which is paramount, and people using Redwood. It's hard to use if you don't know what it is. So I think we accomplished a lot of goals there. And of course, you probably already know what my big announcement was, but I'll talk about it for a moment, just in case you missed it. The big announcement that we did on Thursday, 3 weeks ago, back then, was the Redwood Startup Fund. So there was the $1 million that I've committed to supporting development of the framework itself, so that we have people that are working on it full time, pushing the framework forward. But I am also creating a $1 million startup fund, separate $1 million, that will be administered through Preston Werner Ventures, which is the angel investing side of things that I do. I invest in a lot of developer tooling companies, as well as different climate technology startups more and more these days. And so with this startup fund, what I want to do is write 25 to 50K checks to startups that are using Redwood in their stack. And there's a couple of different things that I want to prioritize with this money. I want to change a little bit the demographics of who we see in our community of people building Redwood startups. And I'd like that to become more diverse. I'd like to see more women founders. I'd like to see more Black founders, other minoritized groups. I want to see you building startups. And so one idea that we had for making that possible was to get money to people earlier than other investors might. And so this is risky money. We'll be investing this hopefully in some startups much earlier than they might otherwise see money, to make certain new ideas possible. So I'm hoping that there are people out there watching this that have an idea for a startup. You like the idea of Redwood. You wish that you could work on it, but you just don't have the time to set aside to do it because of the job or jobs that you're working or other constraints. But having a 25K check might allow you to set those things aside and work for 3 or 4 months on an idea. And if that's you, then I want you to come talk to us. Once I have the process nailed down, which I don't quite yet. I'm working on exactly what the application process will be. So that should be coming in the next few weeks, a first version of what that process will look like. But I'd really love to see more diversity in our community. That's important to me. It's important to the community. And I think it's important to the health and growth of Redwood as a whole. The other thing I'd like to really prioritize is climate-focused startups. As I mentioned, a lot of the work that we do at Preston Warner Ventures, we also do a lot of grant work around climate in general. And so I would like to see more software-based climate approaches, climate change mitigation approaches. So if you have an idea for a startup, a software startup, that could help in mitigating climate change in that effort, then we will prioritize you with this money. So think about that stuff. And hopefully David and I are working on some ideas for getting you more information about what kinds of startups those might look like. We have a team at Preston Warner Ventures that focuses on climate. Hopefully we can get some of those people involved and provide other resources for you to research into what does a software-based climate solution type thing look like, or what could it look like, or where the gaps in the climate space right now that could use work on them. And if you want to work on one of those and you want to use Redwood to do it, then that's another place that I'd like to prioritize this money to go.
Tom, 2 questions that are coming in about that is, what about geographies outside of North America? And I know we have an answer for that. And then another one I'll just say now, if you have questions about the thing you're working on and whether you should apply, just reach out to me. I'm already talking to potential climate startup founders who are looking for co-founders and looking for the thing. And that's completely appropriate. So I just want to really emphasize what Tom said. This is meant to be early stage. It's meant to be risky capital. And we just want it to be strategic. And one of the ways we can be strategic is connecting the dots between problems and solutions. So we want to help with that. And yeah, so for geographic, Tom, I mean, I know the answer, but we've had to ask a couple of times, what about outside of North America? Would you fund companies or people that don't live in the US of A?
I'm surprised you know the answer, because I don't even know that I know the answer, David.
Well, I know what you want to do, right?
I would love to fund people anywhere. There are
Right.
potentially logistical challenges for funding groups outside the US. It's easy for me to fund inside the United States. It's more challenging. I have investments outside the United States. They are a bit more work to support. So part of some of these might be to help people incorporate inside the United States, which a lot of startups end up doing anyway. So I'd say I need to think through a little bit of that just to make sure what I'm proposing is reasonable from a time perspective, especially early on in this process as we're figuring these things out. It's possible that I might restrict it to the US in the very beginning, just so that we can do the learnings of how it works and then add the complexity of non-US entities. So look forward to more details on this website, the redwoodstartupfund.com right now. It's just an email sign up form. So when we do know more, then we'll email out to that mailing list. Yeah. And hopefully answer a lot of your questions at that point.
Yeah, we want to figure that out. Please hear what Tom said as saying, like, we want to talk to you, especially if you're places the capital doesn't normally get distributed. We can't make any guarantees, but we know some people and we want to figure some of this stuff out. Even if that means figuring out, the Stripe or Angel List option to getting you incorporated as a US LLC to start, right? So yes. But we haven't figured it out yet.
We'll get there.
We'll get there.
Don't worry, it's coming. And that's it. There we go. Ta-da.
All right. Those are okay. There was another one about the startup fund. Those are, yeah, really exciting. I want to loop back. Let me grab a couple questions here. We have more to come. Guys, I'm going off the range a little bit here. I'm already breaking our agenda. I want to answer a couple questions that came in while this was going, because I think they're really, I've seen these questions more publicly and about the community. So there were two things that came up. And if you've been with Redwood for a couple of years, these answers feel obvious, but that's why I want us to make sure that we keep answering them. So one question was, whoa, V2 next month. Like, I hate it when projects do that to me, right? And all that does is a log jam and I can't trust it. So what do we mean when we say a major version might be coming soon? And then also, let's couple that with the question, when you say tightly integrated, does that mean tightly coupled? Because one of the things I see about Redwood is it's using things I don't know if I'll need or things I might want to swap out. And what do you mean when you say tightly integrated? And I'm seeing those questions more just publicly, Twitter and a few other places. And I thought it'd be good to address them both right now. So, and I could jump in, but other people, if there's anyone else on the core team that wants to jump in, I can get you on audio as well. Just raise your hand. Raise your digital hand.
I'll take a stab at the tightly coupled versus tightly integrated. So when I say that, generally, I mean, well, I think it depends on the piece. So let's say Prisma. Prisma is tightly coupled in a variety of ways right now. So our Prisma support you see in testing. You'll see that percolate into testing. And you'll see it a little bit in Storybook for how the mocking works. So in some cases, it makes sense that it ties you in. Prisma is kind of like, we expect you to use Prisma. Not using Prisma, you can not use Prisma, but it's going to be a bit more work. The golden path is to use Prisma. For something like Storybook, you could not use Storybook and nothing would be different for you. That you would see no, you just not use Storybook, no big deal. Testing is kind of the same. Like if you don't want to use testing, like you won't suffer for it from a framework perspective. It's not going to punish you for not using the integrated testing. You could use a different testing framework, but you might be missing some of those really nice additions that we have, especially around mocking. So that's generally we want to have this be composable. We would prefer that. In certain cases, like a fundamental piece of the architecture like Prisma, where when you do certain generators like scaffolds, we expect you to be using Prisma. If you're not using Prisma, then the generators are going to generate stuff for Prisma, and you're going to be like, these don't work with my different database that I'm using. So in those cases, you would just not use the generators, and you might have to do some things around testing to make that work. And we haven't done a huge amount of work to really agnosticize the framework around databases, though we're talking with some other database providers now that would be outside of Prisma and thinking about like, well, how would you use another database and have that be a first-class experience? How much work would that be for us to add those kind of the coupling that makes sense there? So we're not trying to paint you into corners as much as possible, but in some cases, you're going to be a little bit painted against the wall because that's just how the architecture of the framework is. So I'd say I would need to know more specifically, like, I don't want to use this thing that you have. How is that going to affect me?
Yep. I'll speak to the, go ahead.
I'll just say, like, for instance, if you're like, I don't want to use GraphQL, then you're probably not going to be using Redwood right now. It is GraphQL, like that's baked in.
Although I know of projects that use tRPC.
Sure, well, it can be done.
Right.
It's code, right? You could do whatever you want, right? But it's like, how much work do you want to do to swap out some of these things? You could do it. You could do it. But I mean, Redwood really is designed around like, hey, let's make some choices for you so that you can move faster.
Right.
If you don't want to do those things, maybe Redwood could work for you with some adaptations, but maybe you should be using something else. I'm not sure. Again, I'd have to know the specifics.
Yeah, understood. So I think, and maybe here's some advice in the purpose of Redwood. We want you to move as fast as possible with as small a team as possible, iterate as quickly as possible with the core features to focus on building your thing. We want you to be able to write business logic and create features as quickly as possible, maybe not with your ideal stack, but when you scale and grow, and as your product matures and as your team grows, then you now have the resources to swap things out, customize, you have the needs cases. Yeah, we've seen people swap infrastructure, deploy providers numerous times, which Redwood makes really easy, or auth providers. Not as easy, but a lot easier than otherwise. And just because the needs change because the downstream end user needs changed. So hear us, and that's where we want the intention to be. But we're really clear on there's a golden path, and we think that's the best way to get started. But we'd love to talk about that more in our community forums as well. And a real quick bit on the upgrades, breaking changes. If you look historically at Redwood's ability to upgrade apps, you will see that we take tremendous care and intention in our release notes in making the most efficient, simple upgrade path possible when there's a breaking change. And we've been doing that for 2 years. So if you want to trust what I'm saying about how we're going to handle major versions going forward, look at our release note history all the way up to 1.0. And you'll also see that there's apps that have been in production since like 0.5. And they've upgraded with us all along the way. And you can ask those questions in our Discord, our community forums as well, because we've learned that if people don't trust the upgrade process, they won't upgrade regardless. And if you wait 2 years, that's just as bad as shipping a major breaking every month if you're not making that upgrade path simple. We also have code mods. So when we say breaking, it means breaking the Redwood way. And we absolutely want to make sure that it's as simple and efficient as possible for everyone to be at the latest every time. So, but these are really important questions, right? Because you need to know this stuff when you're starting out so you could trust that Redwood's going to be what you need in a year from now, right?
I'll also say that you very well might prefer a breaking release every 2 months versus every 1 year or 2 years. Like back when we were doing GitHub, a new Rails version would come out every 2 years or whatever. And it would take us literally 3 months of work to integrate that new release into the GitHub code base, because it was like hundreds of breaking changes. There was all kinds of stuff, really pervasive stuff. And you'd have to start a pull request and branch off and start trying to adapt to the new framework, because you can't do it piecemeal. You have to be like, oh, here's Rails 5. Like I can't partially support Rails 5. I have to fully support Rails 5. And they changed these 15 things that we use heavily, and I need to go in and change all the code to adapt to those. And it ended up being a huge nightmare. And sometimes those efforts would have to be abandoned because they would drift too far from the main code base because we were shipping so much. And then it would be like, well, this didn't get done. We'd start over. I know that one release we had to start over because it drifted too far. It's like, we'll just throw it away and start over because that effort didn't work. Let's try a different approach. And I don't want people to have to deal with that with Redwood. For me, it would be much preferable to have smaller sets of breaking changes more frequently, so that you could say, oh, I'm going to upgrade from Rails 1 to Rails 2, and it'll take me 15 minutes. Right. And then a month later, I'm going to upgrade from 2 to 3, and it'll take me another 15 minutes. I would much prefer to do that than spend 3 months of my life trying to adapt to thousands of changes.
Yeah. And another advantage, this is why I don't make schedules, because then I just break them. I made rules and we're already, so we'll get back to core team, new core team members. I'm about to invite you up, Ryan, Pete, Christine, and Alice. I'm going to grab you right now. Actually, if you all want to, you should be able to come on stage now because you're panelists. So go ahead and turn your video on. I want to introduce you all and talk about the core team. But these are the kind of things we're learning to communicate more clearly. You don't have to upgrade Jest. We do that for you. You don't have to upgrade Storybook to a major breaking. We do that for you. React, we're going to do it for you. There'll be things on the front end you'll have to handle, but we're going to have the code mods and we're going to have the upgrade guide for you. And these have been the challenges in the JavaScript ecosystem. And every time I hear someone saying that, oh, I get these parts and I can already do this stuff and set it up on my own, my reaction is, oh, well, you're missing one. We can do this better. We need help. But you're missing one of the major points of Redwood, which is we handle the configuration integration steps for you. And we do that within the Redwood packages so that you don't have to suffer that pain, which is a major challenge in the JavaScript ecosystem, right? So, so you might see a breaking change because we had to upgrade. Jest 28 is out and its performance benefits, but we'll handle that in the packages for you. and we'll let you know if there's other like implementations you need to upgrade. But again, it's to your advantage that we upgrade more frequently, because the hard parts are, in the car engine, and you can just work on making the car faster with aerodynamics. Right. So I want everyone to know, Tom, like these are all the things. And so please try it and then let us know in the forums how it goes. I should really move on, but last thoughts. I don't want to have the last say, but maybe we should move on. Other things. All right. Q&A is great. Keep asking questions in Q&A. We'll get to those. And right now, if I could, I'd love to have Christine Vandermeer, Pete Colapietro, Ryan Lockard, and Alice Zoe come on up if you are there. Nice, it's working. All right. Oh yeah, look at that Redwood gear. And Ryan, are you able? I don't know if you have video, but Ryan, can I just make sure your audio is coming through, because I changed some things. Whoa, look at all this Redwood gear. All right, great. So Ryan's here. His video's not on, but Ryan's here. So one of the things I want everyone to know about is there's a core team, and Redwood is an open source project, and there is a massive community of contributors and participants from the forums to Discord that are helping out and supporting each other. There are people that are helping with docs, and there are people that are writing code and advocacy, and all of that is open source, people volunteering their time and joining, and we love it. And we optimize for collaboration. And these are some new people on the core team. And something we want you to know about the core team is anyone from anywhere can be on the core team. Now, this is has everyone seen Ratatouille? Do you know? Okay. I cry and I love that show. So please go watch Ratatouille, and then we can talk. It'll be great. I'll give you my Calendly so we can talk about Ratatouille. But I love it. I love anyone from everywhere. Now, not everyone's going to want to be on the core team, but we want to make a place for you if you want to put in the time and honestly the faithfulness of the project, and you have it available for whatever duration. And we have a path for that. I'm someone you could reach out to about that. We have contributors meetups that we host monthly. But so these are all new people. The core team's at about 22 right now. And I want to introduce some wonderful new folks on the core team. This was actually before 1.0. And so you can get to know them and see that, like, oh, hey, I've seen these people in the community. I know they're on the core team. Well, that's my fault. But I want you to get to know them. So they're going to introduce themselves, and they are going to please each of you just how did you discover, get involved in the Redwood project? Kind of an example story, because that's a question people have. How do I get to be on the core team, right? So how'd you find out about it? And where are you, what's your purview, and what are the things you're focused on the core team? If anything, it could be very general. So we'll go around. Alice, if you could go first, and then Pete, I'll have you go after Alice. Go ahead. And so good to see you.
So good to see you as well, and everyone here. Hi, Redwood. I'm Alice. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada. I'm actually just a computer science student. So I think it was definitely a stroke of luck that I got asked to be on the team. But I think it goes to show that if I can make a positive impact here, everyone and anyone can. In terms of what I'm working on here, one is the newsletter. A specific section that I'm working on is called Heroes of Redwood. And that's where we get to highlight amazing individuals from all walks of life, exactly like the people here in this meeting who are brought together by the Redwood community. So it's really to tell the story about who you are beyond just your technical contributions, because we collaborate all the time. I find that, I think that is so much more interesting getting to know the people behind the story. And actually, Chris here will be featured in our next edition of the newsletter. So subscribe there if you want to get to know the community more and communicate with each other on a deeper level. Also, I'm working on an app combining Next.js and Redwood together. So goes back to what Tom was saying about it being like composable. Redwood is flexible enough where you can enjoy the full feature set of Redwood and take advantage of other frameworks like Next for the front end. So that's really cool. So hopefully people could see an example of that and get to enjoy, working on all sorts of startups.
That is really, wait, you're saying you could use Redwood as an API for Next? Who would do such a thing?
And you could use Redwood, like the app, the web app, for you could do it like 3 ways.
Because many startups that we know of are doing this. Is there, I
Yeah.
don't think there is yet, but Alice, is there a repo yet publicly? And or when you have things to share, where will you be sharing that in the community?
I will link it to the repo. It's not done yet. It's almost done. So I will share, I don't know, in the, people will know, or link in the newsletter as well.
All right.
Haven't
very
gone
good.
that far.
Alice, thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you. And there's a lot. Yeah, thank you. It's not, Alice doesn't just do the newsletter. There's a lot more going on and more to come. So we're glad to have you. Pete, go ahead. And Pete, I killed our demo time, but please show the repo.
Sure.
And there was another question, because what you're working on, we need to make like 30, 45 minutes for another time because it's really important. And Pete, there was another question that came in the Q&A around what do you have for Storybook and tests coming up in the future? And so I was waiting for you to queue up the answer to that question as well. So Pete, please introduce yourself. I'm already ahead of things.
Perfect. Thanks, David. Hi, I'm Pete Colapietro. I'm a developer out of Manchester, Connecticut. And I got involved in Redwood through a friend, Alex Trost. Yeah, nice hat. And his community front-end horse, I think another core team member is a part of it. He mentioned that we were doing Hacktoberfest. And so I started looking for some low-hanging fruit on the repository, and I've been working at Storybook at my day job. And so I thought it was a nice fit to slot in some of my knowledge there to help on the core team, because I had really liked what I had seen. I'd peripherally been following Redwood because I had kind of been following what Tom had done after GitHub, and this was a good opportunity to jump in there. And in terms of the integration test that you mentioned, are testing and Storybook together, what's really cool is the Storybook team has put out a bunch of different testing features for their framework, and I'm in the midst of working through integration tests, which allow you to really kind of like Cypress, but in Storybook. So you can, it's much easier to demo, so I'll take that offline. I'll drop a link in the chat. But for those who are interested, the integration test is a really neat way to, as Tom mentioned up top, leverage the Storybook so that you have your components in isolation, get them in a state that you want, but also it's not just static. A lot of these components have dynamism to them. They're loading, he mentioned loading data from Prisma. You might be submitting a form, doing other things. So what's really neat with this integration testing is you kind of really step through all those things, all those different permutations of a component and its events and all those things, and see what it looks like. So it's really, really interesting, and it's a big draw for me to meld those two things in the framework, because I think it makes it out of the box. You get that. So a lot of times you have to configure these things, and it takes a while to get up to speed. And then we check them at breaking changes. So this, you just don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So super stoked. Thanks.
Yeah, Pete, it's really been a pleasure. We work collaboratively with the Storybook team, not quite daily, but definitely on a weekly basis. And Pete, so please share the repo. My apologies that we didn't have time for the demo. And also share all the things you're working on in that repo, plus how people could get a hold of you if they want to talk more about it or even join in and help, because there's some tremendous work. Like all of our forward thinking, what else can we do with Storybook is happening in this repo right now. And it's some really exciting stuff. Thank you, Pete. Pleasure to have you on this team. And Ryan Lockard. Yeah, please. I could tell some stories on all the crazy things you were working on with Redwood. And I reached out and I'm like, what are you, I loved it. There were all these Redwood projects spinning up, and the person behind it was one guy. It was Ryan. And that's how I got to know you. But Ryan, how did you stumble into Redwood originally? And what are you focused on these days?
It's nice to meet everyone. I'm self-taught, so I do a lot of reading of technical articles and whatnot. And the one I was reading was about doing Redwood with MongoDB. and I think it was fauna. But I ended up saying, oh, well, I don't really like fauna. It doesn't seem like a fit, but Redwood seemed like a fit. So I went and joined the community and really fell in love with the community in that aspect. But nowadays I did a lot on containerizing Redwood and pushing it sorry for deploying to Kubernetes and on Docker. And I've done a lot of work on the front end as well. So building off of the React and doing more opinionations that help to just hit the ground running so that you can focus on building the app, not sitting here making choices on this component library versus this one or this library over this one, because there's a lot when it comes to React.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's be, I want to name something that's really important. We want people who participate in the core team and give their time, like we want that to be a valuable experience to you. And there's a lot of ways that could be. One, you get to work with all these integration partners with Redwood and developers in open source. So you get to meet people you never would have that have skill sets that you don't, that you get to learn from, which is fantastic and just a really rewarding experience. Also, it turns out open source is a way that you can find jobs and work and make money. And I love that. And Ryan, that's a bit of your story, right? So another thing that you're working on right now is Redwood gigs.
Right. I'm doing 2 different contracts through Redwood startups that are, Redwood is the core of their company. You know, they're not, I don't know. The day-to-day what I'm doing is being able to work with Redwood and on Redwood. So that's extremely important for me because I spent a lot of time looking for a job. And so for me to be able to join the Redwood community, spend a lot of time learning it, the nitty gritty and how it works and goes together, and then being able to turn that into a job that, you know, I could hopefully make a living off of is very incredible.
Yeah. And I love your story and I want more people to experience that story. That's what we're all about. And it's good for everyone. So our mantra is by helping each other be successful with Redwood is how we make the Redwood project successful. And Ryan, your story is very much a part of it. And Alice and Pete, thank you for living into that mantra as well. Chris, please introduce yourself. And you know what, just take it from here. I would like you, we have a demo. And so what you're working on is going to be our next demo. So please introduce yourself and dive into the demo of the project that you have going. I'm excited to see it.
So hi, everyone. I'm Chris. Yeah, I'm from South Africa. I'm working in South Africa. Yeah, I'm based like 3 hours outside of Cape Town. Yeah, so I'm working on the Stripe Redwood integration package. Yeah, and part of that is the Stripe example store, which I'll be demoing in a little bit. Yeah, so like how I got into Redwood is actually, I don't know, it's like fate or something. A friend of mine actually suggested me to join in on the Stripe Redwood project. At that time I was just passively thinking about getting back into dev because I hadn't like coded in like 2 years time. And I was like, come on, do this. And I was like, yeah, cool. And it's been such a fun ride ever since. Yeah.
And it's been fun to have you on the team. So we're really glad you said yes, Chris.
Well, I'm glad too. I'm super happy I did that. Yeah, so if it's cool, I can.
It's cool.
Okay, cool.
Let's do it. Yeah, it's all you. I want to make sure you can share your screen and we'll stick around, but the stage is yours.
Ooh, that's scary.
I know, you'll do great.
I've gotten better at this, I think. Okay, cool. So I hope everyone can see that. Yeah,
You're
so
good.
this is cool. So this is an example store using Stripe, which is like a payment platform. And the main feature that's being used here is the Stripe hosted checkout page. So I thought I'd just go through like a really like quick little demo of like how things work in it. It's yeah, it's super simple, basic store. You've got some products over here. We've got a little cart over here that you can add stuff to. So we'll just go ahead and stop that. And also we have some, sorry, now some subscriptions you can add to the cart. And we can go here. Okay, well, we're just doing a subscription then. And checking out. Yeah, that's a glitch. We're working on it. It takes a little while sometimes. I don't know, maybe it's just me. But yeah. Okay, cool. So here we have Stripe hosted checkout page. So this is like on Stripe's website. It's got nothing to do with me. It appears that I've already been logged in. So this is me. So we can just complete the yeah. Cool. Okay, and now I should be redirected to the success page. Yay! So that is just a basic, super basic what like checkout. But you can do so much more. So so we've got a subscription going. So if you go into, there's customer portals, which is also something that is available through Stripe that you can use. And when I click this button over here, if my internet would just work with me. We go to the customer portal page. And then over here, I can change like my plan, update it, and do all types of things. I can even change my email. So the thing about changing my email is in the back, I'm using webhooks to actually connect the information that's on Stripe with what's ever happening in my database. So let's just do that. Okay, and we can store. So if I were to, for example, some time, log out. Thank you for letting me know that. Log back in. Now I forgot if I was Chris.
I think it was Chris.
I was Chris and I'm Christine. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
And again, you changed, just so I'm clear.
No, other way around. You changed it to chris@test.com.
Oh, thank you. You had it right. So I was interrupting the flow, but you just made the email update change on the Stripe checkout side, right?
Yeah.
So that was your Stripe
Yeah.
profile. And now you're logging into your Redwood app, API, Redwood database. Okay, with the same one. All right.
Yeah.
Magic.
Okay, into password, and yay! So like in the back, like I said, there are webhooks that the webhook is using a customer updated webhook from from Stripe, which is kind of updating my database for me. I don't know if you guys want to see some code for that. If anyone's keen. But it's really super simple. I think it's something that like anyone could do. Sorry, all these things are just like in the way. Okay, here we go. Functions, works. Over here. Come on. Sorry, it's really slow internet. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I kind of built my own little Stripe webhook handler just because I like things. I don't like noise when I code. But in any case, so here we are listing for the webhook or the event, sorry. And yeah, and then it just takes whatever is happening and then hands it over to handle the database sync, which is actually stored in my services folder, which is basically the place where like you'll do most of your logic on the API side. So we could take a look at that and see what happens there. If I can remember its users. Sorry. There we go. Right. Over here. Very cool. So we're checking to see if things have changed, and then we update user by customer ID. So we can see this is the cool thing. Everything's together. So I can just go up, scroll up, and I can see, okay, yeah, so the user with this ID, you know, updated. And yeah, that's just like a basic little flow on the API side. And I don't know, it's just so much fun to do. Yeah, and that's just a little bit about the store or like building an app with Redwood. It's super simple. I think most of these things, most of these like pages and like products and components, I scaffolded out or generated using the Redwood tools, and it was actually pretty fun and easy. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Sorry.
Chris, thank you. And don't go yet until you talk about what's next for the project, which is.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So sorry. So this whole Superstore app, it's actually part of like doing a Stripe Redwood integration package. So now that this is sort of done, there's still a few things to do, which if anyone is welcome to join in, you know, contribute a little bit. So now that this is where it is, I'm busy working on building out the MVP for the Stripe Redwood integration package. So I'm pretty stoked about that, and like get you know, just, you know, your normal Redwood app to having like a checkout flow and like as few as possible steps. Yeah, so I'm pretty excited about that. I'm pretty excited to jump in there.
Yeah, very good. There's a forum post that Chris published, and that's looking for contributors, but also and other collaborators on this for the next steps. So do post that in the chat, both this repo, if you would, Chris, and that forum post so people could get involved. And contributors are wanted and welcome, very welcome. And Chris is a delight to work with. So if you're interested in Stripe and Redwood, I highly encourage you to check it out. So thank you. And then next up, we have Dom, and we want to continue talking about this project and some things that are happening behind the scenes, but two categories of major features in 1.0, as Tom talked about, were design using Storybook, and then also test using Jest, the testing library, and others. And that is what Dom is going to highlight for us. I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Dom, who's a member of the RedwoodJS core team. Take it away.
Hey everybody, thanks. Let me get the share up. Okay, so I'll get right into it. You saw the UI, and one thing that Storybook really helped out here is we didn't know how the Stripe API was going to work. Were we going to host all the products in our own database? Were we going to get them straight from Stripe? And we needed to start somewhere, and we needed, like, the UI was always just going to be a store, and it didn't really matter like where the data came from. We were just going to show like a picture, the name of the product, and how much it cost. And there's no reason we needed like the API to just build that out. And so we were able to use Storybook to build the page you're seeing. And the cool thing about this is I can actually click on these and the cart still works. Like, this is all a front end React component anyway with state. And even though like the API server like literally isn't running here, we still have the mock service worker in the background, like serving those queries. So we're not getting in between like the actual React component at all. It's just like as separated as it could be. And actually checking out won't work here because it would need the actual data from Stripe, but it was great to be able to iterate on the API and try out, because we wanted to really like see like, should we use serverless functions, GraphQL, and Storybook gave us that separation and just made it easier to focus and scope things. And a couple of things I wanted to point out, maybe like power features, I guess, or like some things that were awesome were like developing the loading states and failure states for the components. It would have been pretty tough to get the spinner to show. I actually don't know how I would do it. I'd probably go here. I'd have to open my dev tools. I'd have to go to network and like throttle it and reload just to see how it looks, or I'd have to break something in my app. But on Storybook, I can just go to that component, see it, and swap over to Success, make sure they're like the same size, or I'm using the same colors for the background, just to get that like visual consistency. And then you can use Storybook just to make your design system. Like it's probably what you think of first is like, here's all like the different buttons you see on the page. And we were able to like, there's some subtle things about them. Like if you hover on it, the transition like is a little bit faster than the one when you hover off, and like a lot of different details that like I am allowed to focus on in Storybook. Like why would I want to start my dev server up just to hover over like this button here? Seems like a little ridiculous sometimes to have all the other content on the page. And then Storybooks also let me like kind of see everything I have at once. Like this is just another story. And so I can choose to render like all of them at the same time. And some things that were cool here too, like this was using styled components. So if I go to the global styles here, this actually has all the styles. So normally when you have your Redwood app, you have this import here that Webpack knows to bring all your styles in just because it's part of the bundle now. But if you're using a different styling system, you might not have that index CSS populated with anything. So Redwood makes it easier to like configure Storybook here with the previews and the web config. And you just say like, all right, for every story, I want to decorate it with the global styles component, and it's there for every story now. And you're working with the same styles as you would in your app. And another thing that's cool about that is you can decorate a single component if you want. In the homepage story, I actually put the main layout in because I want to see the card update when I click on these things. And it also squashes like the components in the middle. Otherwise they'd expand and be greedy and fill kind of all the margin. So Storybook lets you like kind of get your UI to the place you want it and you can work on it. And while it's great to be able to, I can click around here and I see that it works, but I want to work on other features and I want my CI to tell me when I break things. So a test would be great. And so there's a homepage test here too when I generated it. It obviously just comes with the render, like, does it actually render or not? And this test is like useful for sure when you're starting out. And as long as it's not like taking so long to render, I like to keep it in, but there's obviously a few interactions I want here. And the main one I'm concerned about is like when I click on one of these products, I want the cart to update with that number and I want to make sure it's in there. So this is all React testing library now. Like we're using Jest and it's not on the browser anymore. It's all Node. So Jest will use JS DOM to actually like provide the browser context. And then the React testing library integration we have will make sure you're not like focusing on implementation details because its API only gives you the, like, you can only use query by text or things you see on the screen to actually find anything, just like a user would find something. So that makes it really handy for the test to stay like a little less brittle. And then here, like I'm using the same layout wrapping pattern just to give it enough state so that it actually renders. And it'll just go click around and actually grab this cart button here, read the number, and just expect it to be the number of clicks. And as long as I have that in my test, I can iterate on the other things in the API, knowing that this is still gonna come back clean. And if I broke something, now I know like I have to go and figure it out. The other thing here too, that it's kind of crazy, I dug in a little bit, how much is going on behind the scenes here in terms of like rendering this. It seems like a little wild. How does this actually get on the page? And this render function down here is that comes from Redwood testing web. Like we'll make sure when you go to app, but this is all like mocked for you here. The routes, the Apollo provider, the auth provider, all the way to the top, like all those are mocked out. So you can just write the test, and just that would have been an enormous amount of work when like now when I wrote the test, all I had to focus on was like, what is React testing libraries API, and am I using that effectively? And then just like, is the test brittle, and am I querying for the right things? There is one API side test we have right now for checkouts that we'll just this is more like just traditional mocking, where you're actually mocking out the function and seeing if it's called and with what parameters. I could make more use of like scenarios here. There's still like a lot of tests to write for a lot of the components we have. One thing I wanted to showcase too that's not integrated into the framework yet, but is coming up, is probably on the V2 roadmap, is like end-to-end tests. I did like a little integration with Playwright just because these are super useful, especially for Stripe, where you have that checkout stage where you can't really like mock going to their site and coming back with a real thing. It might run too fast to just, I could run it and I'll try, but it might spin by. But this will just go through the whole thing as a user. And obviously, since I work on the framework, we need end-to-end tests to be able to ship anything. And so this is like important for startups and something like we're experimenting and thinking about. So I just wanted to give like a little preview of, if you need to write an end-to-end test for your application, you could go to the Stripe example store and see one there. But there's tons of more integrations to come, and even just with Stripe, like we're looking for contributors for sure. So if you want to try out all of Redwood's features on like a relatively like real product, then we'd love to have you, and we have all the contributing instructions written up. Sorry, let me get rid of that one. I don't know if I'm good on time, David. I could go deeper into stuff, but
no, we should keep moving here. I'm bringing up DT right now. Thank you, Dom.
Yeah, Dom, I love seeing that. That was such a great demo of some of the things that Storybook testing can do together. And if you haven't seen Storybook used in that way to do development on your components, it's such a joy to work that way in isolation. Especially, it's like, oh, you want to work on your loading components? Like that sucks trying to do it in your browser, and you're like, I'm going to throttle it to slow 3G, and you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I get to see my spinner for about 3/4 of a second, and you keep having to refresh to see it over and over, and it's just insane. Just put it in Storybook and you can look at it all day long.
Awesome. So next up, we're going to talk auth and security. As Tom mentioned earlier, that's one of the key components for V1, was to make sure that you can have a secure application. And DT is going to go over Redwood and authentication.
Hi, let's see if this works. Okay, that's looking promising. So I want to talk a little bit about authentication and security, because we get asked this a lot. I get asked this a lot, and there's a lot of things to consider. And instead of doing kind of a demo of you're logged in, you're not logged in, you click on something, you can do something, you can't do something, because that's how you kind of see, that's how you experience auth. I wanted to share a little bit about how we might think about auth a little bit differently and approach it as not just a password. It's not a feature. It's really kind of a bigger concept to the way you work with your users. So authentication isn't just a password. It's really how you begin that relationship with your user. And with authentication, you also have the information about who they are. You have personal information, you have private information, you have favorites, you have where they live and their location. So it represents their identity. Authentication, and this is why when they talk about authentication services, they're often called identity services, because it's the user, it's who they are, and not only who they are, but then what they can do, your roles and permissions, what they have done, the activity as they use the app, and then what have they actually done? How do you link who they are to the functionality of your app? Maybe you're doing purchases like this, like the superstore, where you want to see that folding is your superpower. You're going to keep track of that. So authentication allows you to have this relationship with your user. And it's just a start. It's how you maintain that trusted relationship. And this is a big deal. Authentication and everything here is about trust. And it's so easy to lose that trust between yourself, your company, your business, your product, and your customer or your user. And it's your responsibility. We at Redwood, we give you the choice and the tools and the community, which is a big thing, to help. But ultimately, authentication and the decisions you make is up to you. And it's a balancing act, like everything else. It's a balancing act of effort. What does it take to actually implement these things? Risk. What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if somebody gets, God forbid, social security numbers or something else, but even just dates of birth and cost. Authentication, like everything else, is infrastructure and it costs money. And so you have to balance all those variables to figure out how can I best maintain this relationship? Because without your user, without your customer, without the person, your app doesn't really do much. Well, it does, but I mean. So the Redwood kind of approach, and the approach I take, and again, this is a lot of just my take on things, is that Redwood gives you choice. It gives you the ability to easily set up various different types of auth providers. As Tom noted, it's tightly integrated by default. So we have that security kind of embedded in the kind of ethos of how you're going to manage your services. Initially, we have role-based access control. There's other types of access control like permissions and attribute-based, which will come later. And then also, fundamentally, outside of authentication, there's also observability. So, just because you can log in and log out, that's not authentication. Authentication also, you want to be able to see what's going on. So logging and auditing, that helps you provide a trusted relationship, and secret management. So how do we keep those things secure when you're dealing with your database connections or any other type of secrets. So in terms of choice, we have lots of choice. This is a playground app that we have that you can visit, and the repo is available. So we support Auth0 and Azure and Clerk and Netlify, Identity, Magic Link, Firebase, Supabase. We have some Ethereum support, nhost, and super tokens, as well as the self-hosted DBL. So whether or not you want some things that are more enterprise ready, or you want to do things that are a little bit more with like technically coupled with Azure, you have options. Again, it's choice. And with everything, how do you choose? So DBAuth is great for side projects and very kind of, you've got low risk data, but you need to be prepared to build your own. This is kind of the cost and effort thing. You have to build your own emailers. You have to build your own logic to change passwords and things like that, which is fine. It's again, it factors into that equation. Netlify Identity is great if you're already using Netlify, if you're already deploying out there, and you can manage everything on an API. Auth0 is like complete super control. You have a rich hosted UI, tons of integrations, both enterprise level and social. So not just your Facebook and Twitter authentication, but enterprise SAML type integrations with single sign-on and all kinds of things that you would have to do if you're maybe building an app within a business rather than outside. And there's rules and hooks and flows, anomaly detection, whitelisting. It's power. It's your Formula One car, not your Fiesta, even though Fiestas are cool. Clerk is an interesting and attractive choice. It gives you a lot of social options. It has passwordless. It has multi-factor authentication. It has device tracking. So let's say you're logged in on your phone through your your React app, but also on your web. It can tell that your accounts are in both places, and it has the ability to reshape your tokens via templates. Comes in handy, and it has ready-built React components. So you're not building your login forms, your profile forms, your logout forms, all things like that, which is nice for, again, balancing effort. And then Supabase is another interesting option if you want to have, if you're already using them for your hosting, because it integrates not only with a lot of social providers and other providers, but directly within Postgres at the row-level security policy level. So if you're using their storage or real-time, it's got those hooks in there. Again, it's a choice. So the argument for using an identity service is, for me, is if you're not careful, you think you start out, it's not just a password. You have to build so much. So, okay, now I've got to do emails. Oh, wait, I need to do password strength validation. And then I need to do auditing because I want to make sure that nobody's attacking me. I need an admin API because, oh, I might have to change somebody's password. I might have to whitelist IP addresses because I'm getting a lot of junk traffic. Oh, now I need to have multiple identity providers. Oh, what if somebody wants to log in with GitHub and email? How do I know they're the same person? Oh, now somebody's doing bad stuff. I gotta block them. Oh, am I getting weird anomalous logins? I don't know. And are people spoofing my IP address? How often do the tokens refresh? And I'm getting, is that secure enough? Oh, and now I need passwordless, or I need one-time passwords with SMS. It goes on and on and on. So you think like, oh, I just need to log in. It's bigger than that. So, and then you get into GDPR, and then you start dealing with lawyers and so on. So that's all complex, but we make it easy to set up through commands and CLI commands that allow you to try these out. Just like you're trying out different providers, it's easy to go to deploy to Netlify or to Vercel or Render or Bare Metal. You get the chance to figure out let's try these out. Let's try them and figure out what's the best fit. So the set of commands do all this for you. It sets everything up on your website and your API side to start being authenticated. And again, we do this on the API and web side. So we make sure the GraphQL server is protected by default through something that we call a validator directive, and there's one out of the box called require auth on your SDL, on your schema. So it's easy to go through your schema, and I'll show you an example, and say, oh, what are all my permissions? I'm not having to look into 17 different code files to like build an access matrix to figure out what's going on. We allow you to authenticate serverless functions because, believe it or not, most, if not all, 99%, if not 100%, when you build a serverless function, it's an open API endpoint. And if you're doing stuff in there, anybody can call it. So you should be able to authenticate and protect it. And as Christine showed, webhooks are important when you're doing integrations with third parties. And we support all popular verifiers out of the box. Your GitHub style, SHA 256, and all kinds of different secrets. So we've got you covered on the API side. And on the web side, we allow you to establish private routes or routes. And the use auth hook allows you to figure out if they're authenticated, if they have a particular role, and you can then log in and log out. So there's an example app called the Redwood RBAC demo that you can go visit. And you can see here, I'm not logged in. So I'm using the use auth hook here, and I'm saying, okay, I'm not, if they're authenticated, either show a login or a log out button. Pretty straightforward. Once I'm authenticated, I can start using the has role method from useauth to say, okay, I want to make sure that, sure, you have to be authenticated, but make sure you also have one of these following roles in order to manage posts. So you can check that out. Now, well, got a little dark when I got to gray, but you can see here that now I'm inside of a post, and you can see there's only an edit button. There's no delete button, and there's no add other post button. And that's because if you look at our SDL, which defines our mutation of update post is so right now I'm an editor, Edwina, And you can see the editor has permissions, but if you could see the gray above it, you could see that a create post, only admins, authors, and publishers can do it. And delete posts, only admins and publishers can do that. So that's why I don't have access to, number one, the button, because the web side can obfuscate that. But your GraphQL endpoint is protected there. If you don't have the role, you don't have permission to do that, or you don't have access to do that. And then once you're authenticated, you have access to both the current user and all the metadata around that. So again, grabbing out of the use auth hook, you can display their full name right out of the user metadata, that are stored in this Netlify identity. And then you can check out all the roles that they have. And of course, we only use an editor. So just to wrap up, again, the observability is important because we have an API side logger that it can send things to Logflare or Datadog so that you can track what's going on. Because great, now you're authenticated, but security is also about knowing who's doing what and when, and trying to detect if there's anything wrong going. And then lastly, just protect your secrets for security. Store them in NVARs. We have all those set up by default. Don't commit your secrets to your repo. And then there's interesting services like Doppler that allow you to manage secrets across teams and environments. And be sure to use the tools from Netlify, Vercel, and the other providers that keep your secrets so things are as secure as they can be. And last, to close out, what's next? We might have some new providers such as Okta, which is kind of like Auth0. We'd like to move to a plugin model. Right now, all the auth providers are kind of baked in, so we want to make that a little bit leaner. We want to look into permissions and attributes-based access control. So sure, I'm an editor, but I want to be able to have more finer control around that. And then some improved support for the GraphQL playground. That's it.
And if you want more access to DT's brain, office hours every Wednesday. All of that can be like, you can mind meld and get all of that. It's just amazing stuff. And again, these are all things that Redwood has support for, fully integrated. Like, this is what you get when you get Redwood. It's not, you don't have to figure this stuff out. We're here to, if it hasn't been integrated, we're here to help you out. DT, thank you. That's awesome.
All good.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thank you. Hey, we're going long. And the reason we're going long is not just because I can't follow an agenda, but it's because there are so many things you can do with Redwood, and we can't not cover them all, right? It's all these categories, the end-to-end integration, and it's all good. We are recording. For those of you that were only planning on 90 minutes, I understand. Thank you for your time. We are recording this. We have a YouTube channel. You can smash that like button and subscribe. Is that what they do these days? Anyway,
and ring that bell.
Ring that bell. This will be posted on YouTube. We have some great demos coming up next. And two, as a matter of fact, and then we have a panel discussion with the founders. I am excited to introduce you to Tassin, who is a DevRel at Prisma. We've met recently, and he's going to walk us through what you need to know is that Redwood and Prisma 2, which is the Prisma everyone knows now, grew up together. We were working with the Prisma team at pre-alpha, or like, I don't know, even pre-alpha, but alpha versions of what became Prisma 2. Early on as Redwood was in development. So these are these teams, and this collaboration goes back a long time. Tassin, thanks for joining us. I'll hand it over to you. You are going to talk about building a to-do app in record time with RedwoodJS, MongoDB, and Prisma. Welcome.
Hi, David. Thank you for the kind introduction. So yeah, I'm a developer advocate at Prisma, and I'll just start sharing my screen real quick. So let me know if the audio and video are all kind of clear.
All clear. You are good.
Okay, great. So today I want to talk about how you can use MongoDB in your RedwoodJS application with the help of Prisma. And we are going to use these tools to build a to-do app in less than 5 minutes. So yeah, big challenge. So before we get to that though, I am going to give a quick introduction to what MongoDB actually is, just as like a refresher. So MongoDB is a document database. And what that means is that the data inside MongoDB is stored in these JSON-like objects called documents. And just like JSON, you can store any arbitrary data in your documents. And finally, all these documents go and get stored together in something called a collection. And if you're more familiar with relational databases, collections are kind of similar to tables, and documents are kind of like records. So another important thing to know about MongoDB is that it is schemaless and migrationless. Excuse me. So in this example, we can see that documents have a name field, and which is of type string, right? But I could easily change this to an integer or an array or even another document, and Mongo won't really care. It won't complain at all. So this is important to understand that any kind of schema or structure for the data is enforced at the application level. MongoDB at the database level doesn't really explicitly enforce any kind of schema. And all of this brings us to our last point, is that MongoDB is built with scalability in mind. The lack of strict schemas and any complex migrations means you can evolve your database really quickly, and you can also scale it horizontally really, really easily. So if the shape of your data isn't super well defined, or if you need like massive scale, MongoDB might be a good choice for a database for you. So one of the biggest convenience of working with Mongo is also one of its biggest pain points. So there's no well-defined schemas, and it can become really difficult to handle the data as a project grows. It's also common to have a bunch of documents with different structures all in the same collection. So it becomes very easy to shoot yourself in the foot this way. And this is where Prisma shines. Prisma, through its own schema, can enforce structure to your data in the application level. And I'm assuming most of you know what Prisma is. It's an ORM for Node.js and TypeScript. And it's also used for the data access layer in RedwoodJS. So the way that Prisma works is you first define your database models in your application schema. And this will allow you to generate what is the Prisma client, which is a TypeScript-based, fully type-safe client for you to run database queries with. And if you want to apply any kind of database migrations, you can use Prisma Migrate, but that's not really relevant very much to MongoDB because, again, Mongo doesn't really support Migrate. So Prisma Studio is a GUI that allows you to interact with your data, and it allows you to visualize and edit the data itself and the relationship between all your collections and tables and what have you. So Prisma provides production-ready support for a large number of databases. All of them are mentioned here, with MongoDB support just being added very, very recently. We announced it this April. So as Prisma is baked into Redwood, this means that you can use all of these databases in your Redwood application right now. And speaking about the developer experience of using Prisma, Redwood, and Mongo, so lots of developers have told us that they love working with Prisma because of the great tooling and how it makes them super productive. And I feel that Redwood creates like a similar experience for the entire web stack. So one of the things that I really like about Redwood is that you get type safety throughout your application through the auto-generated types from Prisma as well as GraphQL. And this means awesome auto-completion and not having to worry about many like type-related bugs. And this is especially useful when using Mongo, because Mongo doesn't enforce a structure at the database level, right? Because we've been talking about that. And so having the added safety and reliability that Prisma and Redwood offer really help to keep things manageable. And as a result, you can be more productive and you can iterate faster. So now we are going to do a quick demo. So I'm going to show you how to quickly set up and scaffold a Todo app using Redwood and MongoDB. And I have already created an empty Redwood project. And Redwood already structures things very nicely for us. So API has all the backend code and web has all the front end code. So if we go to the DB folder, that's where your Prisma schema lives. That's what we've been talking about before. And we want to change the data source DB to MongoDB. And we're going to get rid of the default model and create a new to-do model. Okay, so the first field I want to define here is called ID. And this will work as like a unique identifier for each document in our database. So I'm going to write some Mongo specific syntax here, and I'll explain it in just a bit. So, okay. Why did we make this ID field mapped to another field called underscore ID? So underscore ID is this automatically generated unique identifier that's generated by Mongo for us, and it can be used to identify uniquely any document inside your database. So what we're doing is we are just mapping that to the ID field, which will work as Prisma's unique identifier. And Mongo is going to do all the heavy lifting for this field for us. And what this DB object ID thing means is that in the underlying database, this ID is of this object ID type, which is a native Mongo type. But on the database, on the application level, it's a string. So yeah, that's kind of our unique identifier or primary key, if you will. Now for our business logic, we're going to define a description, which will have like the to-do. A Boolean called is finished, which is basically just whether or not this to-do is finished or not, and a created act type, which basically has a default value of now, which will insert the time value of whenever this document gets created. Finally, we'll have an update at, which uses the updated at keyword to basically what this will do is Prisma will update this field whenever this document is touched in any way, like edited or edited in any way. And that's kind of our Prisma model. And now we have to connect to a MongoDB database. And for that, we have two options. So we can use the MongoDB cloud instance, or we can set up MongoDB locally. If you are starting out, I would recommend using a free cloud instance on MongoDB Atlas. And that's because Prisma has this special requirement that it needs to have a replica set up. So a replica set is basically just multiple instances of the MongoDB's database for redundancy and higher availability. And Mongo needs this for, Prisma needs this for certain operations it runs internally. But that's a bit of a configuration step. It's a bit of a hassle to set up locally. So for this demo, we're just going to use a Cloud Atlas and MongoDB Cloud instance. And I actually have an instance already set up and running, and I'll give you instructions in the chat on how you can do this. I'll link you to an article, but it's super duper easy. You just go through their sign up step and allocate a free database. And so once you have done that, though, you'll get something like this, which is a dashboard to monitor your database. And we're going to use the connect button here and use connect your application to get the connection string. So this has the password blanked out, which you kind of have to enter manually. And once you have this, we're going to go back to our project and into .env, where we post, we define the database URL. So I'm going to just paste this here and just quickly, sneakily put in the password. So no peeking, please.
The password is
password.
Super secure.
Well,
super,
well played.
Super,
well played.
Super hacker man. Right. So we are done. And now what we can do is run the Prisma generate command to generate the client for us. Normally, this is where you would run a migration, but once again, MongoDB does not natively support migrations, so you can't really do that. So now that the client is ready, it's time for our business logic. And I am going to confess that I'm going to cheat a little bit here and make Redwood do everything for me.
That's not cheating. That's the point.
Oh,
Make Redwood do it for you.
okay. All right. Yeah, it is just, it really feels like cheating because, so what you can do is you can use yarn Redwood generate scaffold, and you can mention any Prisma model, and Redwood will automatically generate the backend and front end CRUD, all the business logic for you. So let's just do that. Okay, so before we look at the code, let's just kind of see what this did for us. Let's start the Redwood server with Redwood dev. Okay, so Redwood has created the homepage as well as a bunch of these CRUD pages. So let's just take a look. So we have no to-dos yet. Attend Redwood Meetup, and I guess it's finished, kind of. I am attending it. So yeah, so this is really nice because you can watch all your to-dos. Quick, another one, you can show them, and yeah, created ad, updated ad works as expected. And yeah, you can just do all the basic CRUD, and yeah, that's the secret. That's how you make a to-do app in 5 minutes, by making Redwood do it for you. And this is really the easiest to-do app I've ever made, at least. So that's super awesome. And to just quickly go through like what Redwood did for us, in the backend side, we have two interesting folders we want to look at. So in GraphQL, we have todos.sdl, which contains the GraphQL schema or schema definition for all the CRUD endpoints. Here we have create, update, and delete. We have a bunch of queries for reading data, and we have the to-do model, which kind of reflects the to-do data model we made with Prisma. So this is the API contract, and the implementation is available in services todos.ts. And here you can see some of the Prisma CRUD operations that Redwood generated for us. So if you are familiar with Prisma, most of these, like create, update, delete, the syntax should be very familiar. And that's important because there's not like the difference between syntax between Mongo and the relational databases Prisma support isn't like very different. And a lot of the knowledge that you have about using Prisma will kind of transfer over when you are using MongoDB. And that's really awesome. And in the front end, we have pages and layouts and components. So this contains all the cells and forms and pages that you just saw. And of course, all of this is customizable. So I can modify any of these endpoints. I can write, edit them, create new ones. I don't have to use the generators, but they make life also easy. So we'll just go back to our presentation. I think that was 5 minutes. I hope so. And right, there's two little caveats I do want to talk about while using Mongo and Redwood. So there's not yet support for embedded documents with Redwood generators. So what that means is the generator command I just used wouldn't work if we are using embedded documents in MongoDB. And that's this kind of nested document structure that's unique to like NoSQL databases like MongoDB. But you can, of course, write everything yourself, and that will work perfectly fine. So it's just the generators that don't support embedded documents yet. Another thing is there's not a lot of documentation and examples yet about MongoDB, which is totally understandable because we just released MongoDB as generally available very recently. So hopefully both of these things will get solved as we move forward. And again, you're all really welcome and encouraged to help out if you can as well. So the final thing I want to talk about is that we are kind of doing a virtual launch celebration for MongoDB right now. Tomorrow is the last day, and we are doing a live stream to talk about using Prisma with Mongo. And we're also hosting office hours to answer any questions you might have. I would definitely encourage everyone to check it out. So yeah, that's all from me. I would like to thank the Redwood team for having me, especially David. And it's been a lot of fun attending this meetup. And yeah, if you have any questions, definitely do let me know. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I love seeing how far we've come with all the different integrations, and to see Prisma now supporting Mongo is just awesome. So thank you for presenting that to us all today.
Well done.
Next up.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, next up. So we have one last thing on the Redwood path, which is deployments. And to talk about that today, we have Rob Cameron, everyone's favorite video maker.
Hello, everybody. Yep, I'm Rob. I'm Canikin on GitHub. And David asked me to demo the future of deployment today, which, interestingly enough, is also the past of deployment. Because all this serverless stuff, it's all 2020. I think we need to make deployment great again. And in a minute, I will be able to do that. Here we go. Maybe. So of all the videos I've done, I'm actually most proud of that one. David likes to show all the funny ones, but I like that one best. Okay, so let me share my regular screen here. Just a second. Let me find it. Okay, so I'm working on a little side project called AlgoStake, and that's driven a lot of recent functionality that I built for Redwood. And basically, AlgoStake is an app that lets creators of crypto reward people that hold their crypto with more crypto. So this will all probably come crashing down one day, but for now, we're going to ride this train straight to hell, baby. Okay, so the things I need to do weren't just really possible with the existing hosting providers because they all have very short timeouts on their Lambda functions. I needed to run background scheduled tasks for like an hour or longer and a bunch of other limitations, and I just kept running into. So on top of all that, you might have noticed that serverless is a little slow sometimes, even when you're doing like the most basic things like a hello world GraphQL call. It takes hundreds of milliseconds. So I said, fine, I'll do it myself. So I want to go back to the good old days, deploying an app to a server that I have full control of, and Amazon EC2 is perfect for this. So I needed a database, and once you know it, Amazon has one of those as well, Aurora RDS, and I'm using MySQL, my first true love. So let's compare architectures here. I did a quick search for serverless architecture diagram, and I found this. Now, I don't know about you, but I felt a little queasy when I saw this, like when you drive over a hill a little too fast in your car and get that feeling in your stomach. So to be fair, this is mostly all hidden. So providers, like Vercel or Netlify are going to do all this orchestration for you. But there's just something about it, some little seed of anxiety that sits in the pit of my stomach when I look at that. So here's what the typical starting serverful architecture looks like. It's a little bit simpler. Is that nice? So let's see what's going on in the hood here. So we're going to zoom in on the EC2 box and see what's going on in there. So with a bare metal deploy out of the box, you get this. So you've got a built-in process that comes to Redwood, yarn Redwood serve. And can you guys see my mouse moving when I do that? Okay. And what makes the site, and that'll make the site available on 8, 9, 10, just like in dev, but everything's now built and ready for production. So it strips out a bunch of stuff you don't need. And that process serves both API dist and web dist. And it all comes out of here. So what's this current thing over here? So this is something that bare metal does. If you look at the actual directory structure on your server, you've got var www my apps, this would be your app directory. And then you have this current and these little timestamp directories. So what happens is every time you do a deploy, it clones out the code into this timestamp directory, and then current is just a symlink that points to the latest one. So everything is being served from current. So when that updates and points to a new directory, everything just keeps on running, except now stuff like web dist is coming from the newly deployed directory instead of the previous one. And there's another symlink in here for env. You'll see there's a single env that lives in the root of the app here. And then each deployment directory gets a symlink that points to that. So this is your real true env, and then each one acts like it has its own because of that symlink. Okay, so in this configuration, you need to do a little bit of work to get it on port 80 because it's going to be this 8, 9, 10 by default. But once you do, you got your entire app ready to go, being served to internet, web, and API ready to go. And then when you update it, you do a yarn redwood deploy bare metal on your local machine or on your CI server, and you're back online in a couple minutes. I mean, there's no downtime, but you're serving you code in a couple minutes. And you'll see here we've got PM2, and he's monitoring this serve process to make sure it keeps running. And so far, I don't think I've ever had, like, I've run this thing for months, and I don't think I've ever once had this process die. So PM2 hasn't really even needed to do anything, but just in case. So if we go forward here, so here's what I'm doing. This is a little more robust configuration. This will probably be our recommended way to do bare metal. So here I've got Nginx out front, and Nginx is serving WebDist super fast, all the static files. And then instead of yarn redwood serve, it's yarn redwood serve API. So now it's just the API side, and that's serving on port 8911. And then Nginx proxies 8911 out to the world at like /API or / whatever you want your API's path to be. And PM2 is still in here monitoring that process. But in my case, my background jobs and stuff I had running, PM2 also runs those. So it lives in this little scripts directory, and it can fire off tasks at certain times and run them and make sure they finish all other stuff. So how does bare metal actually work? You're going to run your yarn redwood deploy bare metal. In this case, I'm deploying to an environment staging. And what that process does is it SSHs into your server and runs a series of commands. And you get this nice feedback here while it's running. So it's going to run a git clone, yarn install, Prisma migrate. It's going to run a data migrate. It's going to build the web and the API sides. And then once those are built, then it does that symlink. So now the web is serving the newest. And then it just tells PM2 to restart the API side. And it'll wait for the process to come online and running before it shifts traffic over, so there's zero downtime. So after all this, is it all faster? And yes, most of the GraphQL calls on the site return about 50 to 100 milliseconds. And that's like a full round trip to the server, including whatever the database is doing. It's not a hello world. That's like returning real data from GraphQL queries. They're like nested like 2 or 3 levels deep in some cases. Nice and fast. So, in some cases, you never even get to see the loading state of the cell because the loads are just so fast. So it turns out when you got the server and the database next door to each other, and there's no cold start delays for serverless Lambda functions, you can get some really good response times. I've got some great PRs coming for bare metal, and here's 3 of them: support for multiple environments. So you can deploy to QA staging production with that single command. You can temporarily put up a maintenance page. So if you do have some deploy that, it's going to make a major database migration, you can't have people accessing the old one while the new one is running. You can just stick a maintenance page up real quick, do your deploy, and then take it back down. Site's live again. And simple rollbacks. Since everything is served from that current symlink, you can just point that symlink to like the previous directories, and you're serving the previous release instantly. And that's it. Try out bare metal. It will change your life.
This is exactly how we deployed Rails 10 years ago.
Yeah, it all comes back to Rails.
Everything old is new again.
Yep.
Right.
More. By the way, the first architectural diagram you showed was incomprehensible to me, but that second one, that I got. I could do that. That's what
right. Just your own mental model. It just feels so nice and clean. But of course, you'll get pages in the middle of the night if something goes wrong. Yeah, don't worry about that.
All right. Well, last but not least, we wanted to take the rest of our time together today to have a quick panel with the founders, who are all currently on the screen right now. Hello, everyone. So I guess we'll get started. So why don't we start real quick with how all of you know each other and how this all came to be. So why we're all here today. Let's start there. Who wants to take that? Who wants to start?
How about
Suppose
oldest to youngest? I don't mean age. I mean history of knowing each other.
I suppose I should start then. So I've known Rob the longest. We used to, when I was going to school, I dropped out of college. I worked for a startup. That startup got bought by the company that Rob worked at down near San Diego. And we started working together, and we bonded over books about knot tying for some reason. I think that was like, I don't know how that came up, but we both like tying knots. I was in the Boy Scouts. Knots are cool, right? And then we started climbing together, and we were working on software stuff together. And then, so I've known Rob for what, 20 years-ish, about 20 years.
Yeah.
And so we go way back, and we've actually worked on a web framework before. It was called Cold Fusion on Wheels, which still exists, actually. This was like an experiment that Rob and I worked on back when we were doing Cold Fusion. And we were like, could we make a proper framework with Cold Fusion? Because Cold Fusion was like PHP kind of. It was like, I don't know, do whatever you want. Every file is its own file. There's not really a way to stitch them together. But then Rails came out. We started working on Rails, but we're still using Cold Fusion for our day jobs kind of. And we were like, let's build a Rails for Cold Fusion. What should it be called? I don't know, Cold Fusion on wheels, apparently. Made no sense. Should have been like Cold Fusion on reactors or something. I don't know. So we go way back, and we've worked on web frameworks before. Fun fact. And then I guess next I knew David. We met in San Francisco during GitHub. David is related to, what is the chain?
Brother.
I worked with a guy at GitHub named Tim Clem, who's married to a person who is the sister of the person that David's married to. Figure that one out. So so we used to get together in San Francisco at this pizza joint in the Sunset, and we would talk about technology. And that's probably he was probably the first person I talked to about what has become Redwood. I was ranting at the time, probably about, do you remember what I was talking about? I think you were really skeptical. You're like, Tom, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, serverless and Netlify and React and a framework, and it made no sense.
But you were excited about it. So, I was all in at that point.
Yeah. So David had things that he wanted to build around team building and stuff. And so I'm trying to bring David down to like the realistic world, the practical stuff around like what's implementable. And he's trying to suss out like what the hell I'm trying to do with this framework. But they were really great conversations over pizza and beer. And so David was the next person I knew. And then Peter, I know from working at Chatterbug, company that he and I worked at together based out of Berlin. It's language learning software. So Peter came on initially to do mobile development, but ended up being kind of like architect of basically the whole website and what it became around React. We started using React prior to Peter joining, but Peter came in and really started to architect and build more of a proper frameworky thing. Because when you build with React, you're always building your framework, and everyone does it differently. At least this is how it was 3 years ago, when we were doing Chatterbug. And the patterns that we were using, I thought were really neat. And this way that we were building, we were using Rails on the back end, but Rails became just a GraphQL client eventually. And then we had a React front end consuming the GraphQL back end. And I was like, this is like, a lot of this is really great, but it's still too hard. And we're using 2 different languages, and we're using Rails as a GraphQL API. Like, it doesn't make any sense. What if it was all JavaScript? And what if we codified some of these things into a framework and then built it in a way that could be deployed on Netlify using serverless functions for the logic? And the React application is distributed worldwide super fast via a CDN, and then we'll figure out the database later. That was kind of how it started, was like, how could we build a JavaScript web framework that could deploy to Netlify? That was my original sort of thesis. That's why Redwood exists. And that's how I know these people.
Awesome. So my big question that I've been wondering is, how different is 1.0 from that original vision that y'all came up with? Or what is the biggest difference in your mind as Redwood has grown?
I want Peter to answer this question. I will just say, I distinctly remember March 2020, 0.1 published. So the first public Redwood release. And I think I have the message screenshot somewhere, Peter. You just said, I don't know where this is going, but all I do know is when we hit version 1, we won't recognize this thing anymore. Right? And yeah, I think it's really true. Like the direction is there, but there's just been so much more that's been covered, and not just the code base, but the community and people and projects as well. So what do you think, Peter?
Yeah, I think the biggest change for me is in how we intended it to be used. And it was intended to be the Jamstack framework. I don't remember what the slogan was, the full stack framework for the Jamstack. And as time progressed, we realized how hard that was, and how Jamstack probably wasn't the #1 target for us. And we found that serverless or serverful is
a decent deployment target. And I think we were waiting for Jamstack to catch up, which it's doing rapidly. But that for me is the biggest surprise. I thought that it would have been easier to get it working in the serverless environment.
Yeah, I'll say when we were working on this, the intention was, I mean, Peter and I would get dinner every time I'd go to Berlin, which was fairly often back then. And we'd be like, how do we architect, how does this work? Because like, can you stuff a whole application into a single Lambda? Like, is that going to work? Like, how would you, given the architecture that we wanted, how would you split up the business logic into separate functions and still tie it together as a proper framework? Like, what would that even mean? And then you'd have this collection of Lambda functions. Like, that was like the biggest back and forth that we had trying to figure out like how that could possibly work. And eventually we're like, it turns out you can actually stuff an entire GraphQL API into a single Lambda with some caveats. And then at the time I was like, well, surely Amazon is going to make Lambdas like 100x more awesome in the next 2 years. That was like, I was sure that was going to happen. Like 100% sure. It's like, this is going to happen. So let's build for that target, this 100x more awesome Lambda that is going to, where you can deploy as much code as you want, and there's going to be 0 cold time starts, and it's just going to be this amazing world of putting anything you want, any code you want on Lambdas, and it executes, and that's like the future. Turns out I was wrong, and that didn't happen. Right?
I didn't even talk about databases.
Sadly, did not happen. Well, databases is another. Databases have actually come way farther. Yeah. Like that's legit now. You can do that now. Like databases are way more where they needed to be, where I thought they needed to be. Then Lambda has essentially gone nowhere. It completely stood still. Did nothing. They did nothing with Lambda, as far as I can tell. So we had to think about like, well, what does that mean for Redwood? If serverless isn't going to be the deploy target for every use case, like I thought it could be, then we need to be serious about deploying to other kinds of architectures, but offering you still the flexibility that you could deploy to serverless at first if you wanted, if that wasn't performant enough, or you wanted to change strategies, you could take that and you could deploy it to a serverful environment or containerize it because that's how you want to do it. It turns out the Redwood architecture is, in the way that it's built, allows you to do any of those things because the client is a SPA, because of the SPA architecture. You can do those things. You could never do that with a traditional architecture. A multi-page app, that would be, I don't know that would be possible necessarily. It is possible with Redwood as sort of a thing that just happened. And so you get that flexibility. And so that's really nice that you can take and deploy it across any of these architectures. So in that regard, I think it has changed the most. And in our ambition to integrate things. In the beginning, it was like, it was always going to have Storybook, it was always going to have testing. But I had never thought of like integrating all the authentication and the deployment in the way that we did. Like we've gone way further around things like security, DB auth, a lot of the stuff that Rob's done to kind of bring back the sanity. Like where sometimes Rob is always the one that comes in and is like, what are you people doing? Like, this is way too complicated and slow. Like, why don't we just do it this way that we used to do it? I'm like, yeah, okay, well, good idea.
He like waits, there's a delay. He just hangs out and we spend 3-6 months trying a thing. And Rob's like, okay, can I show you how I would do it? And bare metal. So
what I love about Rob's energy on the team is that he's always like, I'm sorry that I'm so angry. He's like, I'm always just angry. And I'm like, Rob, I've never experienced you as angry, just maybe passionate, but it comes out as like frustration. His frustrated, high-pitched voice.
That's my trick. I just go over the top, so it's so ridiculous, and it like diffuses the tension.
That's good. It's a good trick.
It worked. I've never seen you angry. So,
Peter, for those that don't know you, haven't seen you around, I just like you bootstrapped this project. I mean, that's like even saying it lightly. You put this thing on your back and put the original pieces together. Like none of this would exist without the architecture you originally put in place. And now you're doing Snaplet. You have a startup that Redwood was the foundation for getting that going. You've got a team of 10 now. So something like that. So you're busy. We miss you. Peter's so kind. I always ask him like weekly, like, hey, you got some free time, right? Because you help out with some stuff. But anyway, we just miss you, and your impact on this project has been massive. One of the questions I have is, what can you think of anything that you did early on that was like a crazy, like, yeah, I mean, I got to put this in place, get some stuff working, and now it's still there, and right, like, because there's all that. But it turns out it was a great decision. But anything come to mind?
Yeah, so I think like really one of the earliest things where there were a lot of questions about whether it would work or not was authentication. And at that point in time, we had one auth provider, which I think was Auth0. And we created this abstraction, which introduced the Auth0 client-side library, and where we used tokens and things like that in the backend. And that just started expanding. We got like Magic Link next and another one after that, and just many, many more client-side libraries were added to the Auth package. And now when you install the Auth package, you install probably like 12 client libraries. So someone mentioned this earlier, that there's this intention to get to a plugin based architecture where you're not installing all of the client-side libraries and things, as well as the Auth package. So yeah, that to me is like a big piece of technical debt that I wish wasn't there.
Yeah, but it's worked really well from
Yeah,
an auth perspective. The architecture there was really, yeah, I remember when you were doing that. And anyway, the architecture is strong, which also makes it possible for people that want to try different auth providers. Now, again, there's things you have to transfer from one to the other, but because of the work you did there, people can bump around. So yeah, fun. I remember when you introduced us to mock service workers in Storybook. Like for me, that was like, what is this magic? So good.
Yeah, that felt pretty magical. Yeah, it was tough to get that in the code base as well. It's really, really tough. Because we make it work in Jest as well as in Storybook, so client side and in Node. And it was challenging. It wasn't written. It has these two separate parts, but it wasn't really written to be used in the way that we're using it.
Yeah, it's been such a powerful part of the workflow now. So,
and I think one of the things that is important about the work that I did in Redwood is I had no idea what I was doing when I was doing it. I just learned through iteration, and everything we did, I think in Redwood, was iterative. I'm a self-taught programmer, and I've always had this this desire just to do something and not say that it's not doable, but just try. And that's what I try and bring, is like, let's forget that it's difficult and that it might not be possible. Let's just try it. And that's the energy that I try and bring to everything that I do. And when you have that, things can happen. That's what I enjoy about programming.
Ignorance-driven development.
That balances my philosophy. That's way too hard. I don't want to do that.
But I have the time, so.
Well, that's actually a good segue. So there are a lot of things in Redwood now that you didn't expect to be there. Is there anything that you started build that, and whoever has one, please say it. Is there anything that you started building in Redwood that you were like, no, we cannot do this, and it just got cut? Or has Redwood always kind of been iterative and kind of built up to where it is now?
Well, there's one thing I was trying to do in the beginning. I thought that the syntax for making GraphQL calls was needlessly repetitive. And so I built this like parser that would reduce the need to pass in the arguments, and it would just like intuit it from this is hard to explain, but it just felt like when you pass in a variable, you have to declare it, but then you have to, and then you use it, and you end up writing the same thing kind of several times, and it's a little bit confusing. And I was like, we could figure that out for you. So if you just have this variable that you're passing in named the same thing as what you're going to end up using it as anyway, then like, why do you have to re-specify it being passed through the kind of the outside call to the inside call? And I wrote a thing, and it's in some PR somewhere. And it worked. I got it to the point where it worked, and I was like, this is the most fragile thing I will have ever written in my entire life. This is an unreasonable thing to have people do, because it would break sometimes depending on what you were doing, and people would be like, why can't I just write normal GraphQL syntax? And it was a bit too clever, so that never made the cut.
Do we have any others of that nature? Rob, Peter, do you have anything that you worked on that you were like, oh, no, maybe this is not a good idea?
There are probably like maybe 50 PRs that just never got merged. That there are too many to mention. Yeah, I forget. You forget the failures quickly, and you go with the successes.
Again, because they're all iterative. It's hard to say like what, I'm not sure we've pruned much. And I would say some of the things we haven't done or maybe got cut, like it was still directionally, like we're still trying to do that stuff, right? So yeah, but we haven't really pruned. I was trying to think if we've deprecated much of anything, and no.
It's been mostly refining naming. Like we changed the names of things. We have a lot of conversations about the public API and how things are named, because I'm obsessed with that. That the API
is there a stronger word than obsessed?
Is there?
Tom loves names,
unhealthy
which we all
obsession.
appreciate, but Tom is like
fanatical.
I'm fanatical. I'm fanatically obsessed with the public API and just how it feels and how it hangs together, and that it makes sense and that things are named well, because that to me is just a daily friction. If you have an API where the names are all over the place and they don't really correlate to each other, and it just drives you crazy in the long term. And so I am fanatically obsessed with having the API make sense.
Makes sense.
I can think of something we took out. Like we were headed towards using Nexus. I don't even remember what phase that was in there, but you had to like define your GraphQL schema like 3 times with Nexus, or Nexus was the 3rd time or something. And I was like freaking out about that. I finally convinced Peter to get rid of that.
Yeah, Nexus is a code first way to define your GraphQL SDL. So you write it in code and it generates the SDL, essentially, the GraphQL consumes. And there are certain advantages to it. Like you can operate on it as code, or you can call other functions that then will fill out chunks of the SDL for you. And a lot of people like that approach. We had it in there because the Prisma folks were, at least the people we were talking to, were big fans of it. And they're like, this is how you should do it. You should use Nexus to define your SDL. It's the way to go. And that's how we had it. And Rob was like, this is horrible. I was like, I kind of think it's horrible too, actually. We should just write SDL. Like SDL is so simple. Like when you look at the SDL, you're like, I understand what GraphQL is doing. And that is not the case with any of the code first tools that I've seen.
Didn't they since like deprecate Nexus or something?
It's been adopted by someone else now, I think. And I think the guild working on?
Maybe the
Nexus
guild has
now?
Nexus now. Yeah. Yeah, it was not being.
I think Prisma
tended to.
had adopted it at one point. It was someone else that wrote it, and then Prisma was like, "Oh, this is awesome. We're going to maintain this." And I think they handed it off now to someone else too, or something. Yeah, to the guild.
Okay, very cool. So we always talk about community with Redwood, right? So we're talking about the code, we see where it's come, but we always talk about community. And I know, David, your famous motto of by helping each other be successful with Redwood, we make the Redwood project successful. What are your favorite community-led initiatives that have come through the course of developing V1? Because obviously we've talked about how the startups themselves kind of were helpful in building and shaping Redwood to what it is today. So do you have any like favorites?
I really like the
everyone.
makers hour that's going on from a community perspective. Like that was one of the earliest kind of get-togethers for people that are building real stuff with Redwood. And I love when the communities start getting together on their own and are building their own sub communities or areas of interest. That to me is a really healthy sign of growth. I love seeing that.
And is there anything that like someone in the community mentions, you were like, oh, we need to incorporate that like into the framework? Do you have any big call outs there?
I mean, this was like every core team member essentially went through that cycle, right? They're like, we need to add this thing. Like DT came in and was like, oh, let's do auth stuff, or let's do, Danny and DT got together to do directives. We were doing, that's one thing that we dropped, Rob. We had built a whole way to do security
services.
Secure services that was code, like kind of code based.
Oh yeah.
And you build up your authentication kind of thing in your code. And then Danny and DT came in and they were like, what if we use directives, GraphQL directives in the SDL, and built a system for that that did the same thing, but was closer to the SDL so that so you could see in your SDL file which is the entry point for GraphQL. See right there what the permissions end up looking like, or at least seeing what directives are being applied. And they built that whole thing out. And then they're like, ta-da! And they presented it nervously, I think, because it was like, oh, if we do this, we have to erase everything that Rob and Tom put together to do this exact same thing. And they presented it, and and we were like, that's better. And so we dropped the stuff that we built, and that's what we do now.
And Toby actually gave a really good example as well, which was set and private on the router, which I think you and him, Tom and Toby worked on quite a bit. And that was quite a departure from how we thought about the router as being this like completely flat file, and we weren't going to introduce any kind of hierarchy to it. Like private used to be a flag, and then we actually made it a component, and then we introduced set. And yeah, it was really driven by the community. It didn't come from us. And when they showed us that, we were like, this is so much better.
Yeah, that was Toby. That's a
for
great
sure.
one. I've really enjoyed our contributors meetups, which is, I call it a loosely held invite only. But since the very beginning, March 2020, we were struck and excited by the people from all over the world we'd never met before that were active in the community and started helping out on GitHub. And we just wanted to meet those people. So we started hosting a smaller group meetup once a month that still goes on. And everyone is on the core team now. That's, they went from participating at the community at large to joining those contributors meetups. We still host those monthly. We were doing them almost like every week at the beginning. Because remember that whole pandemic thing, we were all lonely and wanted to hang out. So weekly we were running those, and now it's monthly, but that's still been my favorite community event we have. It's always a smaller group, and we get to meet new people, and Rob has to put up with me doing introductions to everyone because I just want to be everybody's friend.
That's still a
People
thing?
are so
Is that
great.
still happening?
Oh, people are great. I just want to know them all. You like Redwood? I like Redwood. Like, let's talk about Redwood.
Yeah, I actually got my start at one of those contributor meetups. So if you're interested in getting involved with Redwood, join a contributor meetup. So I don't want to take too much more time because we are definitely over, and it's been such a pleasure hanging out with you all today. But what are you looking forward to most? So we'll wrap up with, what are you looking forward to most in V2, or what is the one thing you want to see in V2 now that we're out of code freeze, so to speak?
I want to see.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Peter.
Fewer dependencies is what I would really love to see. Like whether they're installed or bundled together in a single thing that you don't know about, I don't care. I just don't want that many yarn resolutions happening when I'm installing things.
So fewer than 100,000?
Something along those lines, yeah. What are we at now?
Magnitude.
A million?
Last count. Speaking of pruning things, that's a good one.
I'd like to see us work on an answer to like an SSR, server-side rendering, things that people reach to Next.js for now. And I'm not 100% sure. Like, we have to talk about this and see what it looks like. I would also love to see a tighter integration with Next.js as a potential front end, because it has characteristics that are different than Redwood, and it can make a really nice client. It becomes kind of another side that has different things that it can do than that Redwood does because of the way that it thinks about the world. But I think that there are solutions that we could come up with to where you could do that natively with Redwood and you just mark it in your routes file. And if there are things that we could do there, that is one of the biggest things that people ask for or need to reach for outside of Redwood itself. And so what is Redwood's answer to SSR or that kind of, all this stuff ends up looking like caching to some degree. So what is Redwood's stance on various levels of caching?
There's a ton of things, but I think, yeah, to echo what Tom is saying, on the server side, I still think that the focus we're giving to the API, the server, is really unique in the React ecosystem, but the JavaScript ecosystem that can be predominantly front end first. And I like where Redwood comes in with a strong opinions on an API that's secure by default, with the architecture that we bring. And I think there's a ton of strengths there. So it'll be V2 and beyond, but anything we can do to strengthen what you can do, what the Redwood server, Redwood API currently does, what you can do with it, and how that can integrate with other clients, other existing projects. I think all that's going to be a boon for the ecosystem, to be quite frank, because it provides so much out of the box. So really excited about that. Really, for me, V2 and beyond, I'm blown away by what the startups are building these days. And so there's the Redwood Startup Club is a thing. And if you are building a startup with Redwood right now, there's a form you could fill out. We'd love to have you be a part of the Redwood Startup Club. The only requirement is that you have built a thing right now. Maybe it's a proof of concept and it's using Redwood in your tech stack. Tech stack. There's a link in our footer on our website about that. I think it's just RedwoodJS/startup-club. But that's what's been blowing my mind in every version that we'll have coming, like seeing what people are doing with the tools that come out. That's where I'm really excited right now. We have
What do you want, Rob?
List.
Redwood record?
Well, we do have a record. Yeah, I was going to say, if we release as often as Tom is talking about, version 2 might not even have that many amazing, mind-blowing features because it might be out in a couple weeks from now. Who knows? But yeah, it would be interesting to dive into Redwood record. I'm afraid I'm gonna reach my limitation of my knowledge of relational algebra, which is very slim. Like if you really want to abstract SQL, there's like a whole branch of mathematics that you need to know how to do that, and I don't know how to do that. But the little convenience things that are in there are pretty nice that I like. I've got a bunch of stuff for bare metal that I want to release right now, but we kind of got to wait because I'll probably be breaking changes. But those would be in 2.0, so I'm excited about those.
What do you want to see, Amanda?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, what would I want to see? I have no idea. You guys, we're always coming up with amazing new things. I couldn't even think of something. What were you going to say, Peter?
I was going to say I can hook Rob up with a topological sort person at Snaplet who can help with these relationships in the database.
Did you just say topological sort?
Yeah.
All right. No, just want to make sure.
A topologist?
What's a
topologist?
Tahini?
A topologician?
Topologician. Chief topologician. That's good.
Well, thank you all. I'm not going to torture you with more questions, but that was awesome to get to hear from you all.
Can I tell a little story at the end?
Of course you can, Rob.
Are we at the end? Are we at the end of the beginning? I guess we are.
This is a piece of advice that Tom gave me. And Tom, I don't know if you remember this, but this has formed a core memory in my brain. I think about this every couple months. It was around the time we were working on Cold Fusion on Wheels. And I'm working on Cold Fusion. And I think you had kind of mentally written it off at one point. It was like Rails and Ruby is the future. So Tom's doing full-time Ruby on Rails. He's loving life, and I'm still doing Cold Fusion. And he's like, man, what are you doing? Why don't you get on? Forget that. Just get over here on Rails. And this piece of advice might be applied to anyone who's listening, who's worried about abandoning their current stack and thinking of moving over to something new. Because at the time, I would say I was really good at Cold Fusion, and you had that you like internalize it. And it's just part of your brain, and everything just flows from your fingers. You don't even have to think about it. And you try to do something new, like I'm trying to do Rails, and like every single step I try to do, I got to stop. I got to look something up on Google. I got to look through the docs, and it's just really frustrating and depressing. So it's really hard for me to let go of Cold Fusion. And I'm telling Tom, he's like, why don't you let this go? And I'm like, dude, in Cold Fusion, I'm like a king. I love it. And here's what Tom said to me. He said, would you rather be a king of fools or a student of masters? And after he said that like clicked something in my brain. I was like, damn it, you know what? He's right. And I think shortly after that, I just switched over to Rails and did that ever since. And then when this whole thing with Redwood came up, and Tom's like, hey, let's go write JavaScript 24/7. And that piece of advice returned to my brain. And here I am. Now I don't know how to write Cold Fusion or Rails.
Yeah. Young Tom was wise.
Yeah, that was good. That was really good.
Young Tom. Well, gentlemen, I've learned a ton. It's been life-changing pleasure.
You're here.
And David, when's our first Redwood Conf?
I'm working on it. You know,
You actually have one sort of in June, don't you?
in June. Well, we've got yeah, well here, yeah, we'll wrap up and some things that are coming up that people can join us for. The best way to learn Redwood is a Redwood tutorial, if you haven't yet. And the best way to be successful with the Redwood tutorial is to join the community. We have as you've heard us talk about, a ton of things happening on a weekly basis, but it's a really vibrant, helpful community, and would love to get you plugged in to both the tutorial, find success there, but then start building things with Redwood. That's what we're all about. You stay tuned for future events and meetups. We're posting more to our YouTube channel, so everything that happened here will be up on YouTube by the end of today. We'll stamp it all and have some chapters up so you can get to the different sections. I'll try to recap and grab all the links too that were shared in the chat and get those up and going. And as Rob was alluding to, excited, there's meetups and conferences that are starting to happen around Redwood. And I'll be speaking on a lot of the work that Peter did will enable this, but I'll be speaking on the full stack design-driven workflow with Redwood. So how do you start from HTML, CSS, JSX, so your components, and work all the way through to a fully dynamic application? I'll be doing that at React Summit in Amsterdam. And if you happen to live in Amsterdam or know someone who does, we're working on putting together a meetup in Amsterdam on June 15th. And we're going to do that right now. I believe the Guild is going to participate, and Prisma is going to participate, and Stripe is going to participate, right? Because remember all these awesome partners that make Redwood happen. They are awesome. And we'll be doing that on June 15th. So keep a lookout. That'll be corresponding with the React Summit event. I think JS World is happening at the same time. I forget what the other one is, but like on the 16th, so there's several conferences happening at the same time. And that'll be really fun. And we're going to meet some people. So all these things coming up soon. So yeah, somewhere in here, we are going to have a Redwood Conf. I just don't know when. Turns out you have to plan things like that. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like getting together in person, how do you do that? So, or we could all just show up at Tom's place. What do you think about that? Just bring your camping gear and your bike if you got one, and we'll
Come
just
to the Redwoods.
Come to the Redwoods, and we'll all just hang out at Tom's, and we'll call that Redwood Conf V1.
Can you open source event planning? If we know anyone who does event planning or has any experience with that, open up a PR.
We do. Yeah, the open conference. Yep. That'd be great. I'm not sure about 22. My hopes are diminishing, but early 23. What do you think? So Ryan Chankey said we should do Redwood Conf in Miami in 2023 January. It sounds warm. There's no redwoods there though.
Where was that at?
Miami.
Miami. Pretty humid there, isn't it?
I know, right?
Isn't that where? Wait, I was thinking of Florida. Miami's in Florida, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Isn't that where Florida man comes from? Why are we going there?
We could become Florida man or Florida woman.
Oh no.
Yeah, Peter, you got to have ambition. You too could be man in Florida.
Eaten by an alligator.
Never say that something can't happen. Just try it.
Florida man. Oh, the culture we've exported. I'm so proud of us as a nation.
That's where the tiger king comes from. Whatever that. If he's from Florida, I'd love to meet him. Let's do it.
All right, it's on. Miami 2023. You too can be Florida man. Yeah, all right. See, this is how decisions get made. You saw it. You saw it here live. Oh, thank you all. We wow, only 42 minutes. Wait, more than that. Yeah, 52 minutes past time. So well done.
Well scheduled, David.
Hey, you know what?
You really nailed it. You really nailed the timeline.
Rob, there were no intros as well, if you pay attention. There were no intros. We still went over.
It would be 3 hours over intros.
To be fair, I think my section was scheduled for 5 minutes and I took about 20. So
and then I got excited and answered questions, but yeah, here we are. But it was good stuff. Like I said, there's all these things, and wanted to talk about them all because that's what 1.0 was all about. For those that are here, you are champions. You are champions. And look for the video being posted soon. I can't wait to see what you build with Redwood. And if you want to help us build Redwood, anyone and everyone, Ratatouille, just reach out. Contributors welcome.
Sorry, what's the Ratatouille analogy? Someone's controlling your head with your under your hat there?
No, that's, but that was a cute part. No, at the very end, right? Anyone can cook.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
The Breaking Bad myth that is this about Breaking Bad? Cook what?
On that note,
Amanda's like, I've got a day job, guys, by the way. Oh, Amanda,
and a
Amanda,
toddler.
thank you. Thank you. See, this is why you are a welcome addition to this motley crew. So thank you. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks all.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, all. We'll
Thank
see you
you,
next
everyone.
time. Catch you in the forums or the Discord. That's where the chat these days.
All the places.
All the places.
Everywhere.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Thanks for staying up late.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
See y'all.